Hello everyone and welcome back to Principles of Game Design. Today we're going to be setting up our project file, which we'll be using for the rest of the semester, as well as starting our first assignment inside of Maya, making a simple dice. So to get us started, I'm going to go ahead and open up my File Explorer. And remember that if you're on one of the lab computers, do not save your files to the C drive, because for security purposes, every time you log out of the computer, any personal files on the C drive will be deleted. Instead, please save your files to a personal folder inside of the D drive, or inside of an external hard drive that belongs to you. We also suggest that you use a cloud drive to back up your files. So I'm going to pop into my personal external hard drive, and I'm going to make a new folder named Principles of Game Design. There we go. And then I'm also going to pop into this folder, and I'm going to make another folder named Maya. Great. Now I'm going to pop over to Maya, and I'm going to go to File and Set Project down at the bottom. And by default, it'll take me to my Documents folder. But remember, we don't want our files deleted. So I'm going to go to my Passport, go into my Maya folder that I just made, and hit Set. And it's going to ask me if I want to create a default workspace, and I'm going to tell it yes please. Then I'm going to go to File one more time, go to Project Window just above Set Project, and that's going to give me a bunch of names. I'm just going to hit Accept for now, and when I go back to my File Explorer, inside of my Maya folder, I now have that workspace file, as well as all of those folders with all of those names in the project window. So these are going to help us sort our files later on in the future. I'm going to minimize my File Explorer now, and I'm going to start by saving my blank project. So File Save Scene, or Control S, and I'm going to name it Dice. You'll also notice that it is automatically put inside of the Scenes folder inside of our project directory. Save. Good. Now that I've done that, let's go ahead and get started with our project. So I'm going to start by making a cube, because dice are square. There it is. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on it with my mouse wheel, and I'm going to hit the space bar so that I divide this perspective view into orthographic views. So I have a top, a front, and a side. I'm then going to click into, let's say, my front view, hit spacebar again, click my cube, hit the W key, which gives me the transform widget, and move it up, just so that it's resting on top of that thick black line. When I hit spacebar again, click into my perspective view, and hit spacebar again, you'll notice that my die is now sitting on top of the grid because we moved it up. Good. Let's click our cube one more time. And now I'd like to direct your attention to the right of the screen, where we are currently in our channel box and layer editor. What this does is it gives us a bunch of information about the object we currently have selected. So for instance, you can see that I've moved it up by 0.502 units. I can go ahead and pop open this Input Polycube 1, and I also get information about the cube itself. So for instance, we have how wide, tall, and deep it is, and I can go ahead and change these values if I want to make the cube larger. So let's go ahead and make it 2 units tall, wide, and deep, and you'll notice that it has grown around the pivot point where our widget is. So we've accidentally made it clip through the ground again, which means I need to hit spacebar, go back to my front view, and drag it slightly up. There we go. Now if you don't like eyeballing it, over here on the far right we also have, remember, how far we've moved it up, and we can simply type in a number instead of having to use the widget tools. Now that we've got this die centered where we'd like it, and as big as we might want it, we can also see that we have these subdivision settings. So for our purposes, I'm going to go ahead and type in 5 in each of these values, and that's going to subdivide our cube. And the reason why will become apparent in a second, is I want to push in the pips that we see in the reference image. So each face of the die has a certain number of pips to push in, and we've now given ourselves plenty of faces to work with. So the next step is I'm going to go to my far right again, and I'm going to go down to my modeling toolkit. And here we've got a bunch of tools for editing the cube. Up top we've got our selection sections. So for instance, we are currently in Object Select. I can also click on any of these, so now this is Vertex Select, which allows me to select specific points, Edge Select, which allows me to select edges, and Face Select, which allows us to select these faces. So I want to select faces on each side that we are going to push into our cube. So I'm going to hold Shift with my Face Select on, and I'm going to start selecting faces. Now I have a 1 face, a 2 face, and a 3 face. And an interesting property of D6 is that the opposite sides always add to 7. So for instance, since I've selected 1 over here, I'm going to hold Alt and left click to rotate my camera to the back, and I know that this face must have 6. Same thing here, this face has 2, so this face over here must have 5. And again, I'm rotating my camera by holding the Alt key and using my mouse, my left click. Hold Shift to select multiple faces, rotate it one more time all the way around to make sure that I've got all of the numbers correct. Good. And now I want to push these faces in towards the center of the cube. So over here on my far right, I'm going to look for the Components menu, and I'm going to click this Extrude button. This has moved my widget down here to the bottom left and given me a small menu to work with. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this blue arrow to push into the cube. And you'll notice that that has moved all of my pips into the cube. So I'm going to very quickly take a look around, make sure that everything's alright, and oh dear, my 6 face is not in 2 separate pips, instead I'm getting these 2 rows. So I'm going to change this Keep Faces Together setting to off, and I have these walls separating my pips. Good. Let's give it one more once over. Alright. Now I'm going to deselect my cube, click off to the right, and here's my D6. Let's go to object mode real quick so that we can show it off. Alright. Now that we've gotten to this point, I'm going to save my project again. Now, we can go back up to the File, Save settings, and you'll notice this Increment and Save button. Unlike most keyboard shortcuts, this is Control-Alt-S. And what it'll do if you click this Increment and Save, or you use this keyboard shortcut, Control-Alt-S, is you'll notice that our file name will grow some numbers. So now we have Dice version 0001. If you use that keyboard shortcut, let's pop open to our File Explorer and go into our Scenes folder. We now have an iterated version of our Dice project. So in this way, if we ever mess up, we can go to older versions of our file. Alright, let's continue working on our dice. We've just extruded all of our faces in. That's good. Let's go back to our reference and see how we're doing. Alright, we've got all of our pips pushed in, but we notice that all of the pips are circular, and the corner edges on our dice are rounded. So we need to go ahead and do that on our dice. Now, the easy way of doing this is by hitting the 3 key on your keyboard. If you do that, you will enter the smooth preview, which has rounded off a lot of our dice for us. But it sort of looks goopy and soft and doesn't really look as rigid. Let's go ahead and pull up our reference side by side so that we can get a good look at what's going on here. So it looks like our dice pips aren't clearly well defined. Our 6 face, our pips are clipping into each other, and the edges around our dice don't look as rigid as they should be. So let's go ahead and fix all of that. To start with, I'm going to go ahead and select my dice, and I'm going to hit the 1 key, and that's going to take me out of Smooth Preview. One more time, to go in and out of Smooth Preview, you hit the 3 and 1 keys. Alright, now let's handle those edges. So I'm going to go to my modeling toolkit, I'm going to select edge, and I'm going to go ahead and select all of these external edges, holding shift and double clicking these edges so that it gives me the whole row. Alright, and I missed the 3 on the back. 1, 2, 3, there we go. So I've selected all of the outside edges on my cube, and I'm going to come back down to the components where I had my extrude, and I'm instead going to click bevel. And bevel has beveled my edges, but it's beveled them a bit too harshly, so I'm going to change this fraction value from 0.5 to something a little less. Let's go there, 0.1. So now I've beveled my exterior edges, and when I hit 3, we can see that it's a lot more rigid, but it still has those rounded corners. Now, in addition to beveling the outside edges, we can also bevel the inside edges. So when I hit 3, you'll notice that my pips sort of blur and don't look quite right. Let's go ahead and use this pip as an example. I'm going to go to my edge select, and I'm going to select these 4 edges on the inside of my pip. I'm going to click bevel, and I'm going to lower my fraction a bit. And then I'm going to hit smooth. And when I do that, you can see that this one is now quite a bit harsher than the other. Now you've seen me do this trick a couple of times where I hold right click and I can change my selection value. So I've swapped from object mode to edge mode before, and you'll notice that my selection in the top right also changes. This is one of the many keyboard shortcuts that I highly suggest you get used to. Is just holding right click and choosing what selection you are going with. Alright, so we can bevel our inside pips, and we can bevel the outside edge. Wonderful. Now, if you'd like to do it a little bit more efficiently than one pip at a time, you can always do them multiple at a time. Select all of the edges you would like to bevel at once. So let's just select all of these, and then go back to my unsmooth view, hit bevel, and they will bevel simultaneously. Alright, but you'll notice that this 6th side is doing something strange. And the reason that it's doing that strange thing is because we have these black faces that sort of glitch out. When we built this 6th face, we didn't put any space in between the individual pips, so this sometimes happens. We've got faces clipping into each other. So let's go ahead and rebuild our die, because we've messed up, and we'll make a new one. So I'm going to start by incrementing and saving to create a new file version. So Control-Alt-S. There we go. Now I'm going to make another cube, but instead of going back to the shelf every time, I'm instead going to hold Shift and right click and hover over Cube. This is another context menu that lets us control which tools we're using in a way that's a little bit faster than going back to our menus every time. So I'm going to go to my inputs again in my channel box, and I'm going to make my cube bigger, and I'm going to move my cube up 1 unit in my translate Y so that it's sitting on top of my grid. Now instead of adding subdivisions this time, I'm instead going to go up into the Mesh Tools menu, and I'm going to grab my Insert Edge Loop tool, and I'm going to click this little black box so that I get this tool settings pop up. Now what the Insert Edge Loop tool does is I can click and drag on an edge and add in these edge loops. However, this isn't particularly helpful in this case because we want our edge loops to be evenly spaced. So I'm going to go ahead and undo all of those, and instead I'm going to go into my tool settings menu over here, and I'm going to click this multiple edge loops. And by default you'll notice that it says 2. So if I click on an edge, I'll create 2 evenly spaced edge loops. Let's, instead of having 2, instead pump it up to 5, because we made 5 subdivisions earlier. Now, the keen-eyed among you might notice that this is a little bit different, because if I select my other cube, let's go ahead and hold Shift to select them both. There we go. and we zoom in and we look at it from the side, we'll notice that this one only has 1, 2, 3, 4 edge loops going along the side, whereas we just made 5. That's because the Insert Edge Loop tool and the subdivisions count differently. In this case, we are making 5 face subdivisions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and in this case, we are adding in edge loops, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's go ahead and undo those edge loops, go back to my edge loop tool, undo, 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 undo all of my selections, get rid of these, and instead of adding in 5 subdivisions, I'm instead going to add in 6. 1, 2, 3. Good. And now that we've done that, I can hold right click, go to my face select, and close my tool settings. And now when I look at this grid, I've got a lot more faces to work with. So let's start selecting faces for pips. So I'm going to select 1 for 1, 2 for 2, 3 for 3, 1, 2, 3. Come back around over here. 1 is on the opposite side here, so I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2 is on this side, so I can come over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 3 is up top, so 4 is down here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good stuff. And I can extrude them again. Now instead of going back to my modeling toolkit, and instead of using the extrude button on the shelf, I'm going to use Control E, which is the keyboard shortcut for extrusion. And again, I can use my little blue arrow to push my faces in. And this time, if I come over to my 6 face, smooth it, and go to object mode so that I can deselect it, we can see that there's no more clipping. Let's compare that to the other version, and we can see that it's a little bit different. The pips are smaller, but we don't have that clipping issue. Alright, but we still have those soft edges around the outside, and I'd sort of like them to get sharper like the other cube. This time, instead of beveling, we're going to add in fencing. So, to add fencing, I'm going to go to my multi-cut tool up here in the top right, click that, and what the multi-cut tool does is it lets us add in edge loops or add in individual edges. So, for instance, I can come in here, I can click this edge, and I can add in edges, just draw them in. And when I hit enter, all of those edges that I just drew will become a reality. I'm going to go ahead and undo this, since that was made for demonstration purposes. In addition to just clicking and adding edges, we can hold Control, and that will give us edge loops that go all the way around the model. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom into one of these corners, and I can pop in these edge loops around the corner. And this is what's known as fencing. So I just fenced this corner. Let's go ahead and enter Smooth Preview to see what that looks like. Deselect it. And we can see that this corner is now quite a bit sharper than the other ones. The exact distance you want to fence varies depending on how sharp you want your corners. So for instance, if I didn't want my edges to be that close together, I can instead add my fencing a little bit further away from my corner. And now I have a combination of hard and smooth. Good. If you want to make sure that they're all equally spaced out, while I'm holding Control, I can also hold Shift. And what Shift does is it snaps it to, if you can see those little yellow numbers, to percentages of distance between two vertexes. So if I want them all to be even, I can go to 50% this way, 50% that way, 50% this way. And I will end up doing that on each of these edges, so 50% and 50% down here, and over here, 50% again. Oop, that was off. 50, there we go. Rotate around, make sure I've got all of them. And there we go. So now I have properly fenced this model. So let's go into Smooth, Object Mode, deselect it. and we can see the effects compared between the bevel and the fence. You can get similar results out of both tools, they're just different methods of doing the same thing. However, note that they are fundamentally different, because if we look at our bevel, we have these triangles on the edge. Alright, now that we've done that, this will be our final model. So let's go ahead and delete the other one, because it's in the previous version of our save, and we'll go ahead and Control-Alt-S to increment and save this one. Finally, let's go ahead and show this die off. So I'm going to go ahead and hit W so that I have my movement tool, and I want to create copies of it. So let's go ahead and hit Control-D for duplicate, and I can go ahead and drag the copies out. Control-D, duplicate. If you don't like hitting Control-D, you can instead hold Shift, and you'll notice that when I hover over one of these arrows, it says Clone, so I can also go ahead and clone the die that way. Now that I've gone ahead and done that, I'm going to hit E to get this little circle, and I'm going to rotate these dice so that it feels a little bit more organic, as if they were being thrown. And let's move them around, maybe pull this one up a bit. There we go. And I want to make sure that I'm showing off each and every face, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I need a good 6. This will be my 6th face. Where are you? Should be opposite my 1 face. There it is. Great. Once you have your dice posed, for this week, a screenshot will suffice. So I'm going to look for my snipping tool. I'm going to click New, and I'm going to draw a rectangle around my dice. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. And I'm going to name this Dice Shaded. Now I also want a wireframe from you. So to give us a good wireframe, we're going to need to learn a couple more keyboard shortcuts. So if you remember 1 and 3 that toggle between the smooth and unsmooth view, 4 and 5 toggle between the shaded and wireframe view. So 5 is shaded and 4 is wireframe. So here we can see that I've hit the 4 key, and we get this wireframe that allows us to see through our objects, which is helpful when we're modeling, but doesn't quite look good. So instead I'm going to hit 5 again to get back our shaded view, and I'm going to hold Alt and hit 5 one more time. And now I have a wireframe on my shaded view, and this is a lot easier to understand. So I want this snip, please. So we're going to pull up our snip tool again. Computer. My computer's lagging. Alright, here we'll pull up our snip tool, hit New, drag an image around our selection, and here's our new one. Save that. This will be Dice Wireframe. There we go. So, one more time. 4 is pure wireframe, 5 and Alt 5 are our shaded views, which are the ones we want. Alright, that's going to be the end of this video. Join me in the next one where we're going to talk about some of the issues that might come up while you're modeling, and we're also going to talk about the unique die and the assignment that's due this week.